Alright guys, here I'm going to talk about what I think is the number one problem with Aliens Fireteam, and it's the Aliens AI. Now, I don't want you guys on the dev team to take this too personally and be like, oh, who's he to tell us how to do our jobs and stuff like that. So, it could well be that a lot of the stuff I'm about to say is already included in the game in some form, and some of it might not be. I don't really know exactly, so just bear that in mind. Okay, so here's how this is going to work. I'm going to go through each section one at a time, give examples, etc. So general problems, synergy and teamwork for the aliens, that is, specific class problems for each of the aliens that we've seen so far. So first, the general problems, I think everyone's noticed this, is that the aliens tend to just run at you in straight lines. Well, okay, no, not straight lines, but they just run straight towards you. Just charge, don't even think about it, doesn't matter if they get damaged, they make very little attempt at evading. The other problem is that they almost always come from in front. Now, this is not strictly true. I think a lot of people do say this, but after looking at things closely, they do sort of jump up on the ceiling occasionally, and or they'll come from both directions instead of just one then the other. And also, it is somewhat down to the gameplay of the players that I've noticed, which is why they always appear to be coming from in front. It's just where the players choose to position themselves in the map is partly why. But nonetheless, there should be alien spawns elsewhere so that they don't just funnel themselves into you like a conveyor belt. So the aliens do ambush you. It's not entirely fair to say that they don't, but it's not very often, and not as often as we would like. And I suppose in a way that would kind of ruin the surprise if it was just something that was that common. But perhaps, it's just not having the effect because the runner aliens, which are just the main ones that are used, are just laughably weak, to be honest. But that is a point that I'll get into later. So perhaps that's part of why the ambushes is just, you just shake them off. So on to synergistic combinations and teamwork. So this is the first point of this is pretty simple, and it's pretty easy to do. I think the big bad aliens like the warrior and the drone and say the burster or anything that's not a runner, basically send them in combinations that complement each other. So for example, the drone in its current state, it might change, but in its current state, the way the drone works, it would be quite effective, I think, if, say, the drone were to pin somebody and at the same time, some bursters come along and just explode and shower them with acid. I mean, that would hurt. That's something you would have to worry about. Or perhaps, say, the warrior. I would think, if you send in one warrior, people just seem to focus fire it, and it just goes down pretty quickly because it picks one marine to go after, and usually it seems to often not be the demolisher, and the demolisher can just demolish it, while it's busy, chewing his friend to death. But it's okay because we can just revive him anyway, so whoop-de-doo, right? But what if you sent in two warriors? What if you sent in two at a time? Then you'd have a bit of a problem. I think one example of a combination that you guys have done already that works well is spitters and runners. It's mostly just runners anyway, but runners work. I think this works well because runners can act as a sort of upfront distraction, and the best thing for them is sort of close range weapons. And while they're distracting you and leaving acid pools all around you, you've got even more acid to worry about coming in from the spitters, and you can't take them out so easily when you're getting attacked by the runners. However, the runners should be able to do a bit more damage, and their accuracy is a bit low on that note. So, next point, aliens should recognize when to attack and when to retreat. So, what I mostly had in mind about this was perhaps, you see all these swarms of aliens coming at you, and in large numbers, that can be quite overwhelming, and if you don't have time to kill them all, or you're not sure which ones to shoot first in order to manage them properly, that can be a problem. Although, again, if the aliens were a little more tankier, it would be a problem. So with that in mind, I was thinking perhaps when it comes down to the last few aliens, with perhaps some exceptions, like if it's a drone on its own or something, when it gets down to the last few aliens, instead of them just attacking, because they've got no chance if it's just a few left, instead of attacking, they should perhaps just retreat and take cover and fall back further in, down the corridor, and they can either save themselves for later, i.e. any aliens that you don't kill now, you're going to have to kill later one way or the other, and stack up the numbers at one end. Or they can, as I say, wait and retreat and ambush you as you move in. You're going to be like, come back here, come on, I want to kill you. You rush in and then get pounced or something like that. So I think this should be implemented if possible. May not be the easiest thing. Now this next point might seem like exactly the same as the first, just reworded, but there is a slight difference, and I suppose what I mean by this one is, I think even if there's not low numbers on the aliens, when they're all just running at you, it's quite easy to spot them and pick them out and shoot them. But if the aliens could actually, see where they're going, I suppose, and see if they are being looked at, for example, or how close to the centre of line of sight of one of the Marines they are, i.e. are they in anyone's focus, I think that should be something that can affect their movement. So if they're out of focus and they're not really seen that well, then maybe it would be better to sort of move a little bit slowly and use that in order to creep up on people. But if they are being looked at directly, then faster and more evasive action would be more logical, I think. So in this way, I think some aliens could sort of creep in unnoticed, creep in behind the lines, for example, without being spotted. So the other point I wanted to raise is that I think certain aliens should be able to change their tactics or behaviours based on the presence of other aliens in the area. However, I realise this might be a rather difficult behaviour to program. Nonetheless, I think it's worth suggesting. So, for example, I think if you have just bursters on their own and there's nothing else around, I think they should lie in wait and wait for other aliens to show up in order to distract the Marines first. Otherwise, they won't really be effective. I mean, they're slow enough and easy enough to see it as it is. They're not going to stand a chance on their own. So having those lying in wait, or they would make very good ambush aliens, basically. So they need a distraction. Another example would be perhaps, say, the spitters. I think if, say, a warrior or a drone is in the area with the spitters, I think the spitters should perhaps be able to recognise or sync up the target. So again, like if a warrior's going after somebody in particular, or the drone is, having spitters kind of pile on top of them would, kind of create double trouble. Maybe this is too harsh, maybe it's not, I don't know. It kind of does depend a little bit on the tuning of the damage done. So the runners, the main 3 points for these is that they run and often follow the same pathway as if they're on rails. They're not particularly fast, and they should be, to be honest. That would make them a lot more intimidating, I think, if they rush you. And then finally, they just have this funny habit of when they're close enough to attack you, they just try to do all these silly evasive actions that just don't work and end up getting themselves killed. And then when they should evade, like when they're running down the corridors, they don't. They just keep going in the same direction. They don't respond to damage or try and dodge or anything. It's just, and considering how quickly they go down, they're just not effective. So here's a little gripe that I have as well. So see this little runner here that just pops out of the vent. It's just single runner on its own, pops out of the vent, shows itself, and then runs away. Well, if I were that runner, it's got very low health. They go down very quickly. it's not really, you know, it's like the first jump scare of the mission. I know this is like a tiny little thing, and maybe I'm just being too nitpicky about it, but I mean, what was the point in that? You know, it didn't jump right out in front of them. There was no real immediate threat. It just kind of, yeah, just it's like, oh hey there, I'm just gonna die now. It's just, honestly, it's absolutely useless. So right here, this is the kind of thing I'm talking about. See these two aliens? They just both follow each other, jump in exactly the same spot, and then they just do this silly kind of snarl / taunt kind of thing, and it just ends up getting them killed. There's too many moments like that where the aliens just kind of stop themselves or slow themselves down, and it looks cool, but it's just really impractical and just non-functional. Yeah. This is just another example of the runner aliens just kind of lining up and running on rails. I mean, I don't even need to slow it down at this point. It's just that obvious. If you notice here, you can see the aliens, how they're sort of running along the walls, and even when they run along the walls, they're quite slow. So, you know, some movement speed improvement would go a long way there, I think. And not only that, but when they're actually running along the walls, they don't stay there. They jump off the walls when they get to this choke point, and they start running through on the floor. I mean, like, why don't they just kind of crawl over the ceiling and crawl round the walls to get to the Marines? Why do they all have to jump down onto the floor? So, yeah. And then here, finally, this little ambush bit. I thought this was a great ambush setup there, only you used runners to do it. Like, why? They're useless. Why use runners? So, you know, sorry to keep repeating that point about the runners, but they do suck. So, you know, any other alien would have been a great one to drop in there. But, you know, facehugger maybe. Or a few facehuggers. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is the drone. Now, I quite like this alien. There's not a lot wrong with it. However, there are a couple of things that could be improved. So the main thing is, okay, it's great that it pins players down and then just runs off back into the vents. That is great, you know, that's brilliant to see. However, the main problem is that it tends to do it in front of the other Fireteam members, so it ends up exposing itself to a lot of damage. Even if it does run off, you know, it tends to expose itself. So some things to help with that, I don't know, perhaps like having some health regeneration on it. Or even better, I think, is that it should only pin down Marines when they're alone or so far away that it won't take a lot of damage, if you know what I mean. And if it can't do that, then it should try and grab one and drag him off into a safer place. Maybe not out of line of sight, maybe just far away. But either way, it should drag them off and isolate them, as it, you know, just as you would expect from such a creature, I suppose. Because if it just exposes itself all the time, it's just going to get fucked really quickly. So that's one little gripe I have about that. And perhaps this could be taken even further. So something it could do is perhaps pay attention to the line of sight of the players. So for example, if you ever played Dead Space 2, as I'll show a clip here, the Stalkers in particular were quite a sort of formidable enemy. They worked in packs, and they would always look out and to see if you're looking at them, and, you know, poke their heads out. And then if they could see that they weren't in your line of sight, they would then charge, and this would give them enough time to get to you before you could realise where they were coming from and shoot them, which was quite effective. But generally the trick was, you know, you look at them and then you look away and pretend as if they're not there, and then that usually worked. But it could work really well with the drone as well. So try something like that. I strongly suggest it. Okay, so now onto the warrior. Now I quite like this one. It's, you know, it's a lot bigger. It seems a lot bigger than, you know, its movie counterparts, and just a lot more formidable. It's got this very nice walk, and the movement is all really great, and it's quite intimidating. But I think it kind of spends a bit too much time walking around trying to be like a badass and not actually killing the players or doing anything much. So, you know, in order to counter this, I would suggest definitely ramp up its aggression just a bit. And on top of that, I would suggest changing its target prioritization. Now, it's great to see it, you know, pick players up and destroy them, but again, this just exposes it and lets it take a lot of damage and not really do anything in the end, other than distract the players for a little bit. And by distract them, all it's doing is, you know, maybe when the players are distracted, they'll take 1 or 2 hits from the runners in the meantime, which again do very, very little. So it's not really that much of a threat in the end, even if it is on default difficulty. So I would suggest 1, ramp up its aggression. 2, if it's going to pick up a player and expose itself, it might as well prioritize, and I mean always prioritize, the Demolisher. So whoever's playing that, just whoever's playing the heavy damage class, it should always prioritize that player, because then at least it's only getting shot by weak, puny little weapons that the other classes have, or at least weak by comparison, if you understand. And perhaps one exception would be if there is a player with particularly low health that it could, you know, I mean, from what I saw in the video, it can take you down to, you know, half health very, very quickly. So perhaps if it recognizes any players with very, very low health, it should do that. And in this clip here, you know, we can see it attacking Zinc here, and it very nearly kills him, and then it just switches target. Like, what? You could have killed him. You could have had the Demolisher dead right there and then completely dumped on the team, but it didn't. It just decided to go for someone else and, you know, give the team a break, which is not the logical thing to do at all. So yeah, so better target prioritization would be a good fix for this thing. Now, the Burster I don't have a lot to say about. It's a fairly simple, straightforward alien. However, the main thing is just that it doesn't really get to the Marines a lot of the time. It's quite visible already, and on top of that, it's just very, very slow, it seems. The blast radius is pretty small, and of course, you know, the highlights over it, you know, the name floating over its head doesn't help. So it seems to be a variant of the runner, and you know, it moves very much in the same way. And, you know, even at this range, like, it just exploded right in front of these Marines, and it did nothing. Like, what the heck? So, you know, if it just... And then in the first clip here, it just goes, oh, hey, look at me. And it doesn't even go for them. It just sits there and waits to be shot. So, you know, I would say the main things for these are they're not good when they stand alone. They should wait for other aliens to, you know, be a target for them and provide a distraction, because otherwise they don't stand a chance of doing anything. So these are the kinds of aliens that you're going to want to have an awareness. They're going to have more situational awareness, because they're going to be a bigger target, an easy target when it comes to approaching the Marines. So they need cover fire, basically. So nearly finished, just a couple more. So the jumper here, it's not a lot bad to say about it. However, it does seem to have about as much aggression as the spitters, but the main problem is this target prioritization. Again, it's great for these jump attacks, and look at this fucking death animation here is just really incredible. I absolutely love it. You know, details like that are just great to see. I mean, you've never seen anything quite like that in any game, as a matter of fact. But perhaps how this could have been done better is if, you know, the jumper didn't just pounce the guy in front of the other guys, and perhaps waited for the rest of the fire team to move through and then pounce on, like, say, the guy at the back, for example, and then it would at least have bought itself a bit more time in order to get the kill, instead of, you know, just being shot off instantly. So that's another thing to consider, I would say. And, you know, it happens here again in this other clip here. So, and on that note, with this little clip here, you can see the working Joes just chilling there, and they're highlighted while aiming, so they are potentially an enemy. And far be it for me to judge them before we've actually seen them in action, really. But wouldn't it just be whack if the working Joes were just sitting there, standing there, just minding their own business? You go through this corridor and turn your back on them. This jumper's at the end, pounces your body, and before you know it, you turn around and the working Joes are on you like white on rice. And last and least is just the spitter. Now, this is probably the one that I had the least issues with, which is why I saved it till last. It's just, it's not a big problem to work on, so whoop-de-doo. But just a little suggestion, I'd say, it uses cover fairly effectively. It uses cover, pops out, spits, pops back in again, etc. And this works quite well, and it doesn't take too much damage until the players start to focus it. And it seems to retreat as well when, when it's on its own. However, it doesn't seem to respond to damage until maybe the last, until it's a little too late. So maybe just, tweak that a little bit. That's all it really needs. The spitter's great, I would say. Perhaps, I don't know, variants of the spitters could help. Say one that shoots like cluster bombs of spit that, make big splashes on the ground. Who knows? So, gonna end things on a high note here. I mean, despite some of the problems, I'm gonna, point out some of the upshots of this game. So, things I really like, just so that you're not entirely disheartened. I can be a bit draconian in my criticism, but, some things have been done really great. One thing I mentioned earlier was, say, the death animations. So just the animations in general, they're really, really quite realistic. One little problem with it would be perhaps the sort of transitions between different animations is not entirely fluid. But, the animations, the lighting, the graphics is all really, really great. The acid blood is really great effects. The sound effects are just, honestly, the really, really pretty and spectacular looking game in terms of visuals. So I'll definitely keep that up. But it does seem that perhaps the aesthetics seem to take over a little bit too much into the sort of functionality of things. As I said, extended animations for, say, the dodging and the snarling of the runners can be a bit of a problem in terms of how tough they are. And perhaps, getting rid of the animations isn't even what should be done. Perhaps it should just be, make them a bit tankier. It might be as simple as that. Alright, with that, I think I'll end it there. I think improving the AI and the aliens' attack patterns would be the best way forward in terms of increasing the game's replayability. Even if it might not be the easiest thing to do, it would be easier than, say, making new game modes to satisfy certain demands of other players because they're getting bored of the current ones that exist. And it would be also better than perhaps, making new maps. There are certain things that would be easier than improving the AI, like rationing ammo or working on the classes a bit better to make it so that the Marines are sort of more dependent on each other. But I think smarter aliens would just be the best thing overall. They would certainly make the atmosphere a lot more tense if they were better at what they do. So, thank you for listening.